The Brett Kavanaugh controversy has renewed the debate over lifetime appointments for Supreme Court justices. Columnists and scholars from all sides of the political spectrum have again floated the idea that justices should not have lifetime appointments. According to a July 2018 Morning Consult poll, 61% of registered voters support Supreme Court term limits. And the movement is bipartisan. A majority of both Republicans and Democrats support these limits. For more on this, I'm joined by Tonja Jacobi in Chicago. She's a professor at Northwestern University's Pritzker School of Law. Tonja, thank you so much for joining us. Walk us through this a little bit here. What are some of the arguments for term limits on the Supreme Court?
Well, the current hearing highlights one important advantage, which is that it would lower the stakes somewhat. If you're appointing someone who could be on the court for 20, 25, 30 years, then it really makes the stakes very high in terms of you have a current Republican majority and they're pushing for a very conservative nominee. Now, the Democrats are obviously opposed to that, regardless of the particular controversy around sexual assault. But if the nomination lasted only 18 years, for example, which is one of the main suggestions, then it would still be important, but it wouldn't be nearly as important.
And there are some people who argue that there should be a limit, an 18-year limit. That's actually something that Justice Stephen Breyer had said he supports. Why that amount of time?
Well, there are 9 Supreme Court justices and 4-year terms for the president. So that would mean that every president got to appoint 2 justices per term, or potentially 4 if the president got 2 terms. And nowadays, justices are serving for about 25 years, but that's the longest that it's been in history. And we have had justices on the court who have been quite old and at times a little doddery, to be honest. And so limiting to 18 years still makes it a decent block of time, but without stretching on indefinitely.
For those who've opposed sort of this 18-year limit, they're saying that it would actually make the court more of an issue each campaign cycle. It would risk increasing the politicalization of the court itself. Do you agree with those arguments?
Well, the court is already highly politicized, and it's becoming increasingly more so in a polarized environment. There's been less move towards compromise, as we saw in the Merrick Garland nomination. So I don't know if that's true, but it would make it more regular as an issue. So there would be more certainty that we know that every president would have 2 coming into every term. So it would make it a more regular issue, but I don't think it would make it particularly more political.
In New York, in the New York Times column, a Harvard law professor suggested that Brett Kavanaugh may actually have to recuse himself from certain cases. Do you believe the political rhetoric in Kavanaugh's testimony would force him to do so?
Well, he certainly said a lot of things that would make it difficult for him to rule impartially any issue that directly involved the Democrats. For example, there are important gerrymandering cases that are going to come to the court this term and probably next term. And it would be very difficult for him to say that he can really rule on them in an independent way. However, there's nothing to force him to recuse himself. We rely on his judicial temperament if he's appointed to be a justice. And people are raising questions about that temperament based on his behavior at the hearings. But it would really be up to him. And so that's why it's so important to make a wise judicial nomination and confirmation process.
Justice Clarence Thomas went through a similar confirmation fight after claims of sexual harassment from Anita Hill. Is there evidence to suggest that Thomas's hearings affected the way he ruled on the court?
It's hard to say directly, but he's certainly the most extreme justice on the court. He's extremely conservative. And so that aligns with some of the ways we might expect him to rule if he was affected by allegations against him of inappropriate conduct, discrimination, sexual harassment, and so on. So it's hard to pull apart whether he is just naturally that conservative. He was certainly expected to be conservative, or whether he was actually affected by the hearings.
When you look at some of the recent polls, they've indicated that Supreme Court, people are losing trust because of this increased heightened politicalization. I want to actually play a bite for you from Chief Justice John Roberts discussing the political divide in 2016. This is just prior to the nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court.
When you have a sharply political, divisive hearing process, it increases the danger that whoever comes out of it will be viewed in those terms. You know, if the Democrats and Republicans have been fighting so fiercely about whether you're going to be confirmed, it's natural for some member of the public to think, well, you must be identified in a particular way as a result of that process. And that's just not how, we don't work as Democrats or Republicans, and I think it's a very unfortunate perception that the public might get from the confirmation process.
So, Tonja, if Americans begin to view the court as a really politicized body, what are the consequences of that?
Well, the integrity of the court rests on the public legitimacy. And so to the extent that Chief Justice Roberts is correct, and people think that regardless of the conservative or liberal nature of a nominee, that this particular nominee is tainted by the process, then I think that really does, there is strength to that argument, definitely.
Professor Tonja Jacobi, so grateful you could join us with your insights.
For having me.